Yes, I'm with Deputy Tadier. He's published a minority report with Deputy Martin on the Electoral Commission PPC proposition. Oh, it's not the PPC proposition, it's the proposition that's come to PPC, and they've got slightly different views to you and Deputy Martin. What are they?
That's right. Essentially, we've lodged a minority report, that's Deputy Julie Martin and myself, because we disagree with the rest of the panel, which basically, I say the rest of the panel, there was a vote where 4 of them were in favour of having states members on the Commission, or at least asking the states whether they wanted states members on the Commission, and 3 of us, including the chairman, Simon Crowcroft, wasn't in favour of doing that. That's basically the position.
Were you there for that vote?
I wasn't there for the actual vote. I was there for the preliminary discussions before Christmas, and then I couldn't be there for the meeting, but I certainly sent an email, made my views known as to what I thought.
Because it's rather curious that the PPC, having been charged to do something by the states, as Bob Hill pointed out, is then not doing what the states charged it with doing. Why is the PPC feels entitled to change its remit?
On this issue, PPC has essentially been hijacked. It shouldn't be changing its position, if you like. PPC's job is as a facilitator to implement the proposition that the states had already agreed less than 12 months before, which was to have and to set up an independent electoral commission, independent meaning without states members who have predetermined views.
Because Deputy Wimberley was quite precise on that in his proposition, which was accepted by the state.
That's right, it was already agreed. So we're seeing ourselves now redebating an issue which has already been debated, convincingly won, because a certain individual and certain individuals in the states want somebody who we know to chair the Electoral Commission.
Just to be absolutely clear, who actually supported that amendment on the PPC? Who was in favour of overturning what the states had decided?
Well, there were 7 people on PPC. Those who were in favour of bringing this new proposition to the states would have been Senator Sir Philip Balash, Deputy Christina Moore, Senator Ferguson, and the last one I have to think about.
Well, the Constable
would have been Constable of St Clements.
St Clements, possibly.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, his position initially was quite nuanced. He wasn't really in favour, I think, but he obviously decided. It's
curious, because do we know that they all voted for that? Is that what they voted for? Or do we know that they voted for that? Is that minuted? Or?
Yeah, that's minuted. I mean, I think that Deputy Moore was not at the meeting, but she'd shown her support in the terms of an email.
And is that sufficient for these meetings? You don't have to be there to vote?
No, you do, but I mean, they had a 3-2 majority. It would have been a 4-3 majority, so the result would have been the same. It's
curious, I mean, you're producing a minority report. Why didn't they produce a minority report?
Because they were in the majority.
Well, but a dissenting report then, should we say? If not a minority, why didn't they publish a dissenting report and send it back to the states?
Well, they wouldn't. Essentially, that's what they have done. Of course, technically, they can't dissent because they're in the majority. So that PPC have simply, but they are, as you say, dissenting from the original proposition. They certainly departed from the original proposition, and it's the contention of both myself, Deputy Martin, and I think even the Constable of St Helier that PPC have overstepped their remit there and are acting illegitimately.
Do you think your proposition, your minority report, does it draw attention to that fact that they are possibly they're flying in the face of what the states actually agreed? I presume that's...
It does. It says that fairly clearly. It says that we can't understand why BBC would be, doing this. That they have an obligation. We have an obligation to actually simply implement and bring forward the changes at the state.
Have the Crown officers been consulted that you know on the legality of what they're doing?
It's a delicate issue. This isn't the first time this kind of thing happens. In the States, when a proposition is passed, we can only request the Minister to go away and do something, and then usually he would come back and do exactly what the States has asked him or her to do. It's really probably a political recourse, so it would be up to the States to have a vote of no confidence in that body or in that minister if he hadn't done what he was asked. But of course we know in Jersey, vote of no confidences don't get anywhere because there's an inbuilt majority anyway.
Of course, the ex-bailiff ran his senatorial election campaign very much on the reform of government ticket, but reform of government by overturning what the States have decided sounds a rather strange way of going about it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's true. Probably the only argument that the proponents who want to let States members onto the Commission have is that Senator Balash did say during his rounds of the island that he wanted to chair the Commission. He didn't say that in his manifesto, but it became clear later. But of course that doesn't really stack up, because people vote for an individual for many reasons. The number one reason is for name recognition, because he's been present in the media very much. He had a high profile, and that's the reason he would have got elected. So it's very difficult to pinpoint actually any particular policy which might have made any difference to the result that he would have got. So
as far as the PPC and your minority report is concerned, both will now go back to the States, will they? They'll be debated. Your minority report will be debated, or just something of information?
It's for information purposes. We thought it was necessary to submit it as a separate document, which will hopefully be read by States members who are reading the main proposition. And it does really make the case, which was already made less than 12 months ago, as to why we should have an independent electoral commission.
Yes. Obviously, Wimberley's, as he was Deputy Wimberley, put the proposition originally. It was accepted. It's on the agenda from the last House to be carried on. Could the States just not turn around and say, well, we're not going to bother at all because the States member is no longer in the House?
I think that's a risk. I would hope not, because it shouldn't really matter who's brought the proposition in the past, that proposition was won democratically, and Deputy Wimberley managed to do sufficient research and be convincing enough to convince the remaining States members that his proposition was a good idea. I would be very disappointed if that decision was overturned, and especially if it was on the basis that it was from somebody who they didn't necessarily agree with politically. Because
with him not being in the States, who's going to lead the campaign in the States for the reforms that he wanted to be implemented?
Well, I think the key thing is that we have to stick with an independent commission. Now, that there are various ways that the States could be reformed. Clothier, over 10 years ago now, already came back with a completely workable system. It was workable, it wasn't adopted, and that's not a problem with Clothier, it's a problem with the States of Jersey. And that's essentially why reform cannot be left to the politicians. So there are various champions in the States for reform. There are also champions for regressive reform, which would actually see Jersey politics brought back into the dark ages.
Well, of course, this particular this will go on the Tom Grouchy blog site, and of course Tom Grouchy was the hero of the Jersey Revolution, and he was fighting in 1769 along with several hundred Jersey people for exactly this sort of reform, that the power should be taken away from those elite Crown officers, ex-Crown officers, who held on to the power in 1769 in the 18th century. And the battle still continues. It seems as though that power still rests to a large extent with this same little non-elected group, now elected in the form of a senator, but this is Tom Grouchy's work continuing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's completely true. We still have the vestiges of an ancien regime, as you might call it. We have we don't have a separation of powers. Truly, we've still got, whether it's to do with the Crown officers or the fact that we've got 12 policemen in the States, or 12 people who think that they're policemen, who carry warrant cards very often, but actually are not allowed to police anymore, because we've had the first Clothier report which says that they can't be both police officers and States members. But these kind of principles are either not understood in Jersey politics or not willing to be enforced.
The public has expressed, because this debate in one form or another has been going on for a very long time, the current public is thoroughly sick of the whole discussion. And we do have other things such as very rising unemployment, terrible housing problems still unresolved. We've got an ageing population, we've got a health service that needs a total overhaul. Huge problems besides our diminishing income stream. Huge problems. Is this really the sort of issue that warrants taking up yet more state's time?
Well, you're quite right. We shouldn't be in this position of redebating this issue, which had been decided last year. There are more pressing political issues, as you mentioned, but the thing is, I would argue, is that it doesn't mean political reform isn't important. It's very important because the two are interlinked. If you can't have a system of government in our island which actually represents the needs and political desires of the population at large, then there's going to be a disconnect in the policies that that government is delivering, because they won't be meeting the needs of the public. So I think the two are inherently interlinked. So it's important that once and for all we get reform sorted out in Jersey so that we can have a government which is both representative and accountable to the people.
One of the curiosities about this whole thing is that there's a movement here. Jersey people are very fond to say, oh, we're independent self-governing. I'm a bit puzzled to know why it's necessary to have outside people at all involved in this process. I mean, obviously the general public are quite capable of finding sufficient people with independence of mind to work out a reformed government system within the island.
I think what we proposed in our report is that for practical reasons it's probably best to keep the composition of the Commission locally based, so people who live in the island, but to have a separate body which would oversee the Commission's work, so it'd be like a body to which they can refer for expertise. But I think more fundamentally we must remember that we're a very small island. We don't always have the depth of expertise in the island that we need, and sometimes it's useful to get an outside opinion. For example, there will be some people in Jersey who may know about voting systems, but there'll be very few people who actually have a practical experience of how different voting systems work in different jurisdictions, and that's the kind of expertise that could be useful.
When I was at the PPC meeting, there were various subcommittees which have been set up looking at a very wide range of issues relating to this general subject, looking at whether you need procurers, or considering whether you need procurers, whether there needs to be nomination meetings for elections. I mean, the potential number of issues that could be raised and examined is enormous, isn't it, in connection with this general reform? Absolutely.
I mean, some of these areas are being looked at already by PPC, the running of elections, for example. Something I'm very keen to, as an individual politician, is to ask the question, why is it that only British people are allowed to stand for election? You can work in Jersey after 5 years in pretty much any job. You can live in Jersey after 10 years, you become a proper Jersey person, if you like, but you're not allowed to actually stand to represent your island that you live in at all, unless you're British. So I think these kind of things about having a more inclusive government need to be looked at as well. Well, that's a very small number numerically, but of prisoners, and they're denied the vote in Jersey. They're not in Guernsey, they can vote in Guernsey. But it's the case that the European Court of Human Rights has looked at it from the UK perspective, and the UK has been deemed to be in violation because it doesn't allow most prisoners to vote. So presumably Jersey's in violation on that. I mean, that debate on its own could occupy many hours of state's time, couldn't it? Just that one simple issue. I think that's true. Personally, I'm a Democrat. I think that basically everybody should be able to vote who's got the capacity to be able to vote. But obviously we're in a very right-wing island. That's not going to be one of the priorities for our government. I think we need to sort out electoral reform. But there's no reason that the people who are looking at election processes shouldn't be taking that consideration into account. There's also a curiosity. I know it's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the figure 42 is the answer to everything, but I'm puzzled to know how Sir Philip grabbed this figure out of the air, and what analysis he's made to say that 42 people would be sufficient to
run the island from a democratic point of view. It's rather curious. I've just been looking around at other jurisdictions. They've all got different numbers. Nobody else has chosen 42 as the magic number. But I wonder on what basis he's arrived at that conclusion, that that's sufficient number of people to...
I suspect, I can't speak for what's going on in Senator Sir Philip Barish's head, but he's probably looked at the states and said that at any one time in the states, we've got 51 members at the moment, at any one time there's 9 people in the states who are not ultra-conservative, right-wing nutters, and that we need to get rid of those 9 people. So if we reduce the number from 51 to 42 and have constables there and then other people who are elected, we can perhaps get the lefties, the loony left, out of the states once and for all.
Because the catalogue of unfinished reform that's there, just law reform, so much is out of date and does not work. The law is not just because it's ancient, it's obscure. That debate has been going on for centuries. It was raised with Tom Gruchy back in 1769, the obscurity. Even on present numbers, we actually need more states members to do with the backlog of work that needs to be done to tackle the problems that this island has. It seems so unrealistic that you can reduce the number of states members and solve all these problems.
I think that's a very good point. What we should really be doing is working backwards and finding out what jobs need to be done and how many people do we need to do those. Personally, I think that we could benefit from an extra layer of administration at a parish level, for example. I'd like to see actually parish councillors being built up to deal with issues of an everyday nature in each parish. And then the government, the island of the States of Jersey, you could reduce the numbers, but they would be dealing with actually real high-level political issues and policy making. And I think that would be a good way, first of all, to get people involved in the grassroots. There'd be an interchange between parish councillors and between the states members, and I think that would actually be a good way to get people more involved and have government more
extraordinarily, Guernsey has managed to get one class of elected politician. They're all deputies now. There's 45 of them, I think, plus 2 in Alderney. So they've got that figure for their 60-odd thousand population. They haven't achieved an all-island vote, but they're all got the same status. So it can be done. There's nothing, and they also have parish representative at parish level. Douzaines, the douzaine still exists, so you have a similar sort of thing. It can be done. It's not proven yet to have brought Guernsey to its knees.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think whatever solution is brought forward, though, it needs to be, first of all, proportional. You need to make sure that there aren't districts which are getting voted, seats which are getting voted for by 400, when other people, like the Constable of St Heliers, being voted for by 30,000 people, or at least representing 30,000. These are basics of democracy, and as long as you've got one constable in St Mary's who represents 1,000 and one in town who represents 30,000, how can we have a hope of getting proper representation for our island? That needs to change. Well,
in an effort to get proper representation, a few citizens in St Clement have called a parish meeting to discuss Deputy Larissier's amendments. That will take place on the 21st, the evening of the 21st. Ironically, that meeting will be chaired by the Constable of St Clement, who is on the PPC panel, and so I don't know whether that amounts to conflict, but it's part of the sort of multiplicity of roles that people have to play in a small community. It may be inevitable, I don't know. There may be nothing wrong with that, I don't know. But that meeting will take place. But he has declared on the radio that only people of the parish will be allowed to address the meeting from the floor. So you've got an interest in it. Do you have an idea whether you'd be allowed to address that meeting if you would?
Personally, I wouldn't want to. If I go to the meeting, it would be purely for information purposes. I'm also a member of PPC, so I would like to keep the meeting it's been convened by the parishioners of St Clement. I don't think it's appropriate to be too heavy-handed at any meeting. You want to try and get a good contribution from people. But I think essentially the meeting is being called to find out the views of the parishioners, so they'll be able to vote. I think that's the most important.
They will vote specifically on Deputy Larissier's amendments, whether they support them, whether they don't. In other words, whether they want politicians on the commission or not. That's basically the main thrust of it. They will vote one way or the other and make their views known to their elected representatives, both in the parish and the senatorial candidates, which will include Sir Philip, of course.
But just to follow up on that, there's also a meeting on Wednesday, which I think is Wednesday the 22nd, if I remember rightly, at the Town Hall, and that's been organised by the Jersey Writers Association. So anybody from the island who wants to come along can go there and speak. It doesn't matter which parish you're living in. So I think that's a good opportunity for people to get their views.
I think the St Clement's meeting is more that you see, this is the worrying aspect about this. We're saying that at the end of all this there will be a referendum with whatever reforms are suggested. But as I spoke to Deputy Harissier, referendums tend to be a yes or no answer to rather, and this is going to be a very complex question, isn't it? It's going to be a multifaceted question. So there isn't going to be a simple yes or no. So the referendum is a bit of a myth, really. It won't be very effective.
Well, the referendum that we should be having is now, should states members be allowed to sit on the Electoral Commission. There's no point in having a referendum once it's been allowed to be perhaps completely shelved and completely loaded, because then the public are going to be presented with something which is
they're going to get a fait accompli, aren't they?
Well, that's the risk, and that's what I hope doesn't happen. But maybe it's not too late now to lodge a proposition asking for a referendum on whether states members should be on the Electoral Commission.
St Clement's is the only parish that I know so far that's called a meeting. Anything happening in St Bernard's,
That's work in progress at the moment. I've been speaking about that with some friends, so that may well happen.
Okay, well, we'll see what happens, and we will listen to the debates that will go on and on and on. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.